Out of all the seasons of anime I've covered in the past, Winter 2023 has gotta be the most ridiculous of them. Aside from the few how the hell did this get a second season anime, it seems every studio decided to adapt whatever isekai or reincarnation fantasy they could get their hands on. We got overpowered hero kings and exorcists starting over, farmers, master chefs, and handymen flexing their skills on medieval people, the outlier protagonists who just want to retire, then villainesses, sorcerers, and your standard edgy series. Oh, and then we got Nier Automata. So, if you have some sort of niche particular taste in isekai or fantasy, then it's more than likely one or two of these shows here will scratch that itch for you. I mean, just read the titles in the description and I'm sure you'll get a general idea of what they're about already. If you're still not sure whether you're interested though, then let's take a closer look at what each one's about. But first, if you've ever wanted to be in an isekai and create a harem of your own, then now you can with today's sponsor, Refantasia. As I'm sure you already know, it's an aesthetic city builder that transports you to a world of magic and fantasy. A new land where your ultimate goal is to build your kingdom and conquer the world. So, as you recruit a team to manage your stronghold, you'll also level them up and expand your armies, eventually leading to enough power and resources to scale your conquest. Aside from those aspects of war, economy, and operations though, the best thing about Refantasia is its culture. Culture that has you rethinking yourself the same way interspecies reviewers did. So, by having romantic encounters with every waifu imaginable, not only will your harem have anything from goddesses to slimes, but you'll also be able to interact and create love stories with them. They're these intricately designed characters that you'll eventually produce heirs with, then leverage as assets to create alliances with other nations. It's a core gameplay aspect that has you establish ties through an expansive web of marriages. You can also customize them with new skins like the Christmas and soccer skins. So, if you're interested in this harem-focused isekai, then feel free to use the link in the description or my QR code to download Refantasia Charm and Conquer for free today. It's honestly a big help in supporting the channel. Plus, you can use my code for special rewards. But now, let's get back to the video. Starting things off with the sequels, first we have the return of the most chill and OP protagonist since Tatsuya. A genuinely comedic take on the oversaturated power fantasies that brings us more of the reincarnated Anos Voldigode, the Misfit of Demon King Academy. Now, this may seem like another generic OP protagonist reincarnating some millennia later, but I promise it's one of the most entertaining out there. Like, not only are the flexing scenes extremely satisfying, but this show knows exactly what it is and what the viewer wants from it. So, if you're looking for over-the-top battles, somewhat intriguing lore, and climactic payouts on par with the finales of Arifureta, then you definitely don't want to miss out on this one. Another returning anime from Studio Silverlink is a different power fantasy involving a certain OP shielder, the return of Maple in Bofuri Season 2. For those of you that don't already know, this is a lighthearted fantasy where a girl plays an MMO for the first time and as a result ends up maxing her vitality to the point where she's basically invincible, leading to a rather infamous reputation with the other players. So, what makes Bofuri so entertaining is the interactions Maple has as she continues to break the game. It's a fun fantasy that really focuses on the game aspects of the VR MMO that she's playing. As for the two isekai that are returning, one's a very calming show whose light nature is meant to be relaxing as you watch, while the other is a harem that really makes me question how these series get greenlit in the first place. I'm not gonna dive too deep into either, but if you're looking for something similar to Slime 300 and Bookworm, then by the grace of the gods Season 2 is up your alley. If you're looking for a mindless isekai on par with something like the smartphone one, then maybe you could find some fun from the Fruit of the Evolution Season 2. Now, the last returning fantasy this season is actually the anime I'm going to be covering for the next 3 months. DanMachi Season 4 Part 2, which drops us in right after that crazy cliffhanger from the first part. There isn't much I can say without giving away spoilers, but from what I've read, this is apparently the best arc in the entire series. It's grim, it's centered around the dungeon, and the focus seems to be on my favorite character, Ryu. So, if you haven't caught up to Season 4 yet, then you definitely should before Part 2 comes out. It's honestly a lot of fun to watch so far, and you'll be able to keep up with my content every week. If we switch over to the new shows now, while there are quite a few that fall into the category of isekai, there are also a couple in their own genre of fantasy called Reincarnation. A similar premise of starting a new life from zero, but minus the usual otaku getting hit by a truck then waking up in a fantasy world. Of the ones that are just isekai though, well, first we have Farming Life in Another World. A man who dies just before the age of 40 then meets a god capable of granting him several wishes. Unlike how they'd usually wish for power or something exciting though, this guy just wishes for normal things. A healthy body, a peaceful life, knowledge of the local language than the job of a farmer. It's an adaptation of a light novel about a simple man living a simple life. Another isekai following that same line of simplicity is the adaptation of the 4-cell manga Handyman Saito in Another World. This one focusing on a skilled tradesman and the application of his knowledge to help those around him. An interesting thing to note about the people he travels with is that they too were isekai'd from their own worlds as well. So it's a bunch of short stories with various different stereotypes that form a kind of anthology with this handyman at the center of it. Interestingly enough, this next isekai is being done by Studio Mappa, a light novel adaptation that goes by the name Campfire Cooking in Another World with My Absurd Skill. At first it starts with your typical protagonist being summoned to save the kingdom, but the main character here wasn't summoned with anything particularly strong. No, instead he was given a skill called Food Menu, an ability that lets him obtain food-related items from supermarkets in Japan. So, after being kicked out from that party of heroes, our protagonist sets out to make use of this skill his own way, essentially by creating amazing meals no one has ever tried before. It's another isekai where the protagonist is living a simple life the way that he wants to. Now, the last isekai that follows this sort of independent-style protagonist is the light novel adaptation of Saving 80,000 Gold in Another World for My Retirement, a story focusing on a girl who can travel between the real world and this new medieval world of fantasy. It's when she discovers that she can go between both that she decides to use modern-day technology to get rich in the new world, resulting in her bringing things like guns to defend herself, then solar panels to power her TV and game consoles. I'm not sure what part of that starts making her money, but the gist is pretty much the application of modern technology into medieval society. Moving on to the Reincarnation-focused anime, and the first is Studio Blanc's adaptation of the Reincarnation of the Strongest Exorcist in Another World. After being betrayed by his own party, our main character uses a secret reincarnation technique to bring himself back to life in another world, a world in which the magic there pales in comparison to the magic that he used to know. So, as he uses his old overpowered techniques to survive, we basically get your standard power fantasy but with a shoehorned isekai element. The reincarnation anime that seems a bit more interesting is Studio Comet's adaptation of Reborn to Master the Blade. A very similar story to the Exorcist one, but instead of a mage we have a hero king. That and he gets revived back into the future version of his own world. So, being reborn from Divine Knight into this less spectacular Lady Squire, this hero king takes the challenge to master the blade once more. But rather than use his power to create a country like he did before, this time he'll set aside the politics and focus his new life solely on swordsmanship. Of course, there's certain plot elements that make that particular aspect more interesting, but I don't think that's the go-to reason for watching this. It's more so if you're looking for an action-based fantasy with a female protagonist, in which case the animation will really make or break it. What we have next are a bunch of shows that are just your standard fantasy series. No isekai and no reincarnations, just adventurers doing their thing in a medieval world of fantasy. So, starting with the most anticipated, first we have Ningen Fushin, a light novel adaptation that goes by adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world. And just like how the title states, that's pretty much what to expect from it. It's a group of unlikely adventurers who meet at a tavern and all just happen to bond over the fact that they'd been betrayed by someone, thus resulting in their lack of faith in people. So, with the common belief that everyone else is scum, these adventurers band together and create their own party, leading us down yet another standard fantasy with adventure at its core. If you're looking for a power fantasy somewhat similar to Eminence and Shadow, then the Iceblade Sorcerer might fill that gap for you. It doesn't have that same quality or comedy, but it does have that aspect of the main character keeping his overpowered abilities secret. He's a renowned hero from a bloody war who struggles through PTSD while going through school at this academy. And though he poses as a commoner there, the conspiracy within the academy results in him having to showcase his powers sometimes. So perhaps as the debut anime from Studio Cloud Hearts, maybe they can create something fun out of this. A fantasy that focuses more on finding hidden power is the upcoming adaptation of this long light novel name. A story about a dark knight whose lack of power results in him getting fired from the Demon Lord army. He then saves a girl and goes to her village, then slowly finds out that he's more powerful than he thought himself to be. Now, last but certainly not least, isn't your typical medieval fantasy, but instead a sci-fi dystopia that I'm sure you've all heard before. That's right, I'm talking about A1 Pictures' upcoming adaptation of Nier Automata. An amazing story in the distant future of 5012 where aliens have invaded Earth and led mankind towards extinction. So, with remaining survivors forced to take refuge on the moon, their only hope for a counterattack is through the use of androids. I'm not going to go much deeper than that, but if you've played the game, then I'm sure you're already aware of how amazing this story is. So I'm very curious to see if an anime version of it can provide the same impact that the game did. Considering the amount of story that they do have to go through though, it's hard to believe they'll finish the entire thing in only 13 episodes. They haven't confirmed how many or how far into the story they'll go, but when you look at the talented staff being put in charge of it, at the very least we can tell that we're in for both a visual and audio spectacle. If I had to guess though, I'd say that the version 1.1a that's included in the title is a solid indicator that we might be getting multiple seasons. I mean, it wouldn't really make sense for them to include it otherwise. Now, given the significance of the game it's based off of, the core thing determining its success will be how faithful it is to it. That's usually the way it goes for projects like this. If you're someone who isn't familiar with Nier at all though, then regardless of expectations you should definitely give this a watch, especially if you're a fan of mechs and sci-fi. It's such a unique world with so much creativity and depth to it. Far better than a lot of the other shows I previewed today. So, with that being my personal recommendation for the season, the other series you may want to look out for are these ones. Bungo Stray Dogs, since that's just a high quality superpower anime, Onimai since it's the first anime from Studio Bind since Mushoku Tensei, then a villainous otome game one with the premise some may find interesting. But yeah, that's pretty much all that I got for you. There isn't too much quality in the new isekai or fantasy, but there are some other shows that are definitely gonna shine this season. So be sure to let me know which ones that you plan on watching. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So until next time, ciao!